The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary should have filled our home with peace. Instead, a family dinner became the setting for my father's cruelest game, a $50,000 secret, and the ultimate betrayal. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary usually filled me with a sense of peace. It was the scent of a Sunday, of family, of the new life my husband Mark and I were building. Our 2-month-old daughter, Lily, was asleep in her bassinet in the corner of the living room, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my world. My mum was here, a quiet, calming presence who had moved in temporarily to help us navigate the chaotic waters of new parenthood. She was a lifesaver, handling midnight feeding so I could catch a few precious hours of sleep, and making sure Mark and I actually ate something other than granola bars. The only discordant note in our domestic harmony was my father. My parents had been divorced for over a decade. It was a bitter, messy split that left fault lines running through our family, lines I was constantly trying to pave over. My dad had remarried a woman I politely tolerated, and he had a way of looking at my mother's life choices with a kind of smug pity that made my blood boil. Today, he had come over for dinner, a peace offering of sorts, an attempt to play the doting grandfather. But with my dad, there was always an agenda. The first hour had been surprisingly pleasant. He'd held Lily, made all the right cooing noises, and even complimented my mum's mashed potatoes. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally mellowing out. Mark was being a perfect host, refilling my dad's wine glass and steering the conversation towards safe topics like sports and the stock market. My mum, ever graceful, excused herself after dinner to go check on Lily and tidy up, leaving the three of us at the table. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. My dad swirled the dark red liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on the vortex he was creating. "So," he began, his voice deceptively casual, "it's really great that your mother is here to help out." I smiled, a little too brightly. "It's been a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without her." Right, he nodded slowly. He took a sip of wine, then set the glass down with a definitive click. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Mark. "Must be getting pretty expensive, though." Mark, who had been leaning back in his chair, sat up a little straighter. "What do you mean, David?" "Well, another mouth to feed," my dad said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. "Groceries aren't cheap these days. And utilities, I'm sure the water bill has gone up with all the extra laundry." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I knew where this was going. It was his classic opening gambit, a slow circling of the prey before the attack. "Dad, Mom helps out with groceries. She insists." This was a white lie. My mum offered, but we always refused. She was living on a small pension and some savings, and the last thing we wanted was for her to spend it on us. My dad completely ignored me. His laser focus was still on my husband. "Is that right, Mark? She contributes?" Mark looked from my father to me, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. He was trapped. He was a terrible liar, but he also knew this was a minefield. "We don't expect her to, David. She's here doing us a huge favour. Her help is worth more than any amount of money." It was the perfect, diplomatic answer. But my dad wasn't looking for diplomacy. He was looking for a fight. "A favour, sure," he scoffed, a bitter twist to his lips. "But this isn't a short-term visit, is it? I heard her lease was up on that little apartment she had. She's not planning on going back, is she?" The blood in my veins turned to ice. My mum's landlord had decided to sell the building, giving all the tenants 60 days' notice. It had happened right before Lily was born, and the timing felt like a blessing. Of course, she could stay with us while she looked for a new place. There was no question. It wasn't something I had thought to broadcast, especially not to my dad. How did he even know that? "We're happy to have her for as long as she needs," I said, my voice tight. "It's not a problem." My dad finally turned his gaze on me, and it was cold. "It's not a problem for you, maybe. You've always been soft when it comes to her, but Mark here," he said, turning back to my husband with a look of man-to-man conspiracy. He's got a new family to think about, a wife and a child to support. He has to be practical. Mark's jaw tightened. David, I'm not sure what you're implying. And then my father leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, his voice dropping to a low, venomous tone that was meant to sound like genuine concern. It was the tone he used right before he delivered the killing blow. He looked straight into my husband's eyes, completely bypassing me as if I wasn't even there. I'm just asking, Mark, does your mum have no money for food? How did she live before my daughter? Before Lily was born? He paused, letting the toxic questions hang in the air between them. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like she saw a golden opportunity and grabbed it with both hands. You're a smart man. You need to think about your own family now. Your daughter. The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. It felt like a physical blow, knocking all the air from my lungs. The accusation was monstrous, painting my gentle, loving mother as some kind of calculating parasite. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to launch myself across the table, to tell my father exactly what a cruel, bitter, old man he had become. But I didn't. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at my husband, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I waited for him to explode, to defend my mother, to defend me, to tell my father to get out of our house. I looked at my husband, my rock, the man who was supposed to be my partner in everything, and he said nothing. He just sat there, his expression unreadable, caught in the headlights of my father's brutal interrogation. Absolutely nothing. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one a tiny hammer blow against my heart. Mark's face was a mask of neutrality, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't looking at me. He was still looking at my father, as if waiting for further instruction. The silence was his answer. It was a gaping wound in the middle of our dining room, and my father's words were the salt being poured into it. A volcanic rage finally surged through my paralysis. My voice, when it came, was a low, shaking thing I barely recognized as my own. Get out! My father's head swiveled towards me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly replaced by that familiar, infuriating smirk. He had gotten what he came for. He had planted his poison. Now, sweetheart, I was just having a conversation with your husband. I said, get out of my house, I repeated, the words gaining strength, each one a steel plate being riveted into place. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The noise made Mark flinch, finally breaking his stupor. Sarah, calm down, Mark started, reaching a hand toward me. I recoiled as if his touch were fire. Don't you dare tell me to calm down, I hissed, my eyes locked on his. The hurt I felt was so profound, so sharp, it was almost physical. You sat there? You just sat there and let him... I couldn't even finish the sentence. The betrayal was choking me. My dad, ever the master of the dramatic exit, slowly rose from his chair. He picked up his jacket from the back of the sofa, taking his time. He walked over to Mark and clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of male solidarity that made me want to scream. You think about what I said, son, he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. It's your family you have to protect. Then he looked at me, his eyes devoid of any warmth. You'll thank me one day. And then he was gone. The click of the front door latch was deafening. The roasted chicken scent was gone, replaced by something metallic and sour, the smell of betrayal. I stood there trembling, my arms wrapped around myself as if to hold my splintering pieces together. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was Mark who broke it, his voice a strained whisper. Sarah, I'm sorry, I was stunned. I turned to him slowly. The man I loved, the father of my child, looked like a stranger. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a plea for understanding that I had no capacity to give. Stunned? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You were stunned into silence? He accused my mother, the woman who has been waking up at 3 a.m. with our daughter so you can get a full night's sleep before work, of being a manipulative freeloader. He did it in our home, at our table. And you were stunned. He's your father. What did you want me to do? Punch him, he exclaimed, his voice rising in frustration. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I usually found endearing. Now it just looked weak. I wanted you to be my husband, I shot back, my own volume rising to match his. I wanted you to say, David, you're out of line. I wanted you to say, that's not true, and you will not speak about my mother-in-law that way in my house. I wanted you to say anything other than sitting there and letting his poison just hang in the air. Your silence was an agreement, Mark. Can't you see that? To him, you sitting there quietly meant you agreed with him. That's not fair. I was trying to process it. He caught me completely off guard with that stuff about her lease. So what? I stalked towards him, my finger jabbing the air between us. So what if he did? My mother needed a place to stay. My mother, who raised me by herself after he left her for a younger woman with a trust fund. My mother, who worked 2 jobs to make sure I had everything I needed. She needed our help. And we gave it. That is the end of the story. There is no conspiracy. Suddenly, a soft cry came through the baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Lily. Both of us froze, our angry words instantly evaporating, replaced by a shared, instinctual parental concern. I saw a flicker of the man I knew, in Mark's eyes, a flash of worry for our daughter. Then the floorboards creaked overhead. My mum. She was up. She must have heard us. A wave of shame washed over me. So powerful it made me nauseous. The last thing I wanted was for her to know the vile things my father had said, or that her presence in our home was a source of conflict. I'm going to go check on them, I said, my voice now a flat, emotionless monotone. The fight had drained out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. I walked past Mark without looking at him and headed for the stairs. Sarah, wait, he called after me, his voice soft again. We need to talk about this. I paused at the bottom of the staircase, my hand on the newel post, but I didn't turn around. No, Mark, you need to think about this. You need to think about why your first instinct wasn't to defend my family, our family. Upstairs, my mum was already holding Lily, rocking her gently by the window in the nursery. She was humming a soft lullaby, her back to the door. She pretended not to have heard a thing, but her shoulders were tense, and her movements just a little too deliberate. My heart broke for her. I quietly took Lily, who was now settling back to sleep, and put her back in her bassinet. Everything okay, honey? My mum asked, still not looking at me. Everything's fine, Mum, I lied, my voice thick. Dad just left. She finally turned, and her eyes, so full of a wisdom born from 1,000 heartaches, met mine. She didn't press. She just gave me a small, sad smile and a gentle squeeze on my arm before heading to her room. When I came back downstairs 20 minutes later, the dining room was cleared and the dishwasher was humming. Mark was sitting on the sofa, hunched over his laptop. He didn't look up when I came in. The air was still thick with unspoken accusations. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, my body feeling heavy and old. I just wanted this day to be over. I wanted to rewind to this morning, before my father had walked through our door and detonated our peace. It's not nothing, Sarah, Mark said suddenly from the living room. His voice was different. It wasn't angry anymore, but it wasn't apologetic either. It was clinical, objective. It was the voice he used for work when he was analysing spreadsheets. It set my teeth on edge. What are you talking about? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. The expenses, he said, still staring at the screen. I know it's not what you want to hear right now, but your dad, he wasn't entirely wrong about the cost. I just looked at our grocery bill for the last 2 months. It's up nearly 40%. And utilities, he was right about that too. This isn't sustainable long-term without some kind of plan. I stared at his back, dumbfounded. He was doing this. He was actually doing this. After everything that had just happened, he was sitting there with a spreadsheet, proving my father's disgusting point. The water glass in my hand started to shake. Are you kidding me? I whispered, incredulous. You're actually sitting there running the numbers, trying to calculate my mother's worth in dollars and cents? That's not what I'm doing, he said, turning around to face me, his own face a mask of frustration. I'm trying to be a responsible husband and father. We have a baby, Sarah. We have to be practical. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're all emotion and I'm just trying to look at the facts. The facts. I slammed the glass down on the counter, water sloshing over the sides. Here's a fact. My mother has saved us thousands of dollars in potential childcare costs. Here's another fact. My mother's emotional support has kept me from having a complete breakdown, which is priceless. But you go ahead, Mark. Keep staring at your numbers. I turned to leave, to go anywhere he wasn't, but his next word stopped me dead. Then what's this? He asked, his voice now quiet and confused. He turned the laptop around on the coffee table so the screen faced me. If we're so concerned with facts, maybe you can explain this one. I walked slowly into the living room, my heart pounding a strange, new rhythm of dread. I looked at the screen. He had our joint checking account pulled up. He was pointing to a line item from 3 weeks ago. It was an incoming wire transfer. My eyes scanned the description, then the amount, and all the air left my body in a single, silent gasp. The transfer was for $50,000, and the sender was listed clearly, Eleanor Vance, my mother. I stared at the screen. My mind refusing to process the information. $50,000. The number seemed to glow, a stark digital indictment. It was an impossible sum. My mother didn't have that kind of money. Her pension was modest, barely enough to cover her rent and basics. Her savings, I knew, were a small nest egg she guarded fiercely for emergencies. This amount was more than her entire life savings combined. It made no sense. Where did she get that money, Sarah? Mark's voice was low, cutting through my confusion. The accusatory tone was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite decipher. It was a mix of bewilderment and a dawning, unwelcome suspicion. I don't know, I stammered, my eyes still glued to the transaction details. This has to be a mistake, a bank error. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. The sender name was clear. The account number was ours, the money was there. A $50,000 bank error? Mark closed the laptop with a soft click. Banks don't make errors like that. And why wouldn't she tell us? Why would she secretly deposit a fortune into our account and then pretend to be struggling? His words hung in the air, twisting my father's early accusations into something even more sinister. My dad had painted her as a freeloader. This suggested something else entirely. A deception so deep and complex I couldn't begin to fathom it. Why hide it? Why the charade of having nothing, of needing our help, if she was sitting on a pile of cash? A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. She didn't pretend, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was defending her on instinct, but the ground beneath my feet felt like quicksand. Her landlord sold the building. That's real, I saw the notice. And maybe that was just the perfect excuse, Mark countered, his voice hardening again. The perfect story to move in here, to make herself indispensable to, I don't know. Sarah, this is insane. All this time, your dad's been going on about how she's bleeding us dry, and secretly, she's richer than he is. The mention of my father made me see red again. This has nothing to do with him. Don't you dare use this to justify his behaviour or yours. I'm not justifying anything, he shot back. I'm trying to understand why your mother would lie to us on this scale. You've been so worried about her, Sarah. You've been stressed about her finding a new apartment she can afford, about her finances, and it was all a lie. She's been playing you. She's been playing both of us. Every word was a blow. The image of my mother humming softly to Lily, her face etched with a quiet sadness, warred with the stark reality on the laptop screen. I felt like I was being pulled in two. Was my entire understanding of my mother a fiction? The woman who made me soup when I was sick, who taught me how to braid my hair, who held my hand through every crisis. Could she really be capable of such a monumental deception? I'm going to go ask, I said, my voice resolute. I couldn't stand here and speculate. I couldn't let Mark's and my father's poisonous theories take root. I needed to hear it from her. I needed to see her face when I asked. Wait, Mark said, grabbing my arm as I turned to go upstairs. His grip was firm. Think about this. If you go in there angry, she'll just clam up. We need to be smart about this. There's something she's not telling us, and it's big. He was right, much as I hated to admit it. A direct confrontation would only build a wall between us. I needed to understand. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. An inheritance I didn't know about? A lottery win she was too embarrassed to mention? None of it fit. My mother wasn't a secretive person. At least, I'd never thought she was. We spent the next hour in a tense, whispered strategy session. The animosity between us temporarily shelved in the face of this greater mystery. We decided I would approach her in the morning, casually. I would mention I was reviewing our finances for a new savings plan for Lily, and happened to notice a large, unexpected deposit. I would ask about it from a place of concern, not accusation. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Lily's gentle breathing on the monitor. Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last. The money felt tainted, a silent testament to a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Mark slept beside me, but it was a distant, cold presence. The chasm my father had opened between us had only widened. The next morning, the house was filled with a brittle, artificial calm. My mum was in the kitchen, making pancakes as if it were any other day. She smiled at me when I came in, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The smile looked so genuine, so full of love that my resolve wavered. How could this woman be a liar? "Morning, sweetie," she said cheerfully. "Pancakes will be ready in a minute. Did you sleep okay?" "Fine," I mumbled, pouring myself a cup of coffee. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath. Now or never. "Hey, Mum," I began, trying to sound offhand. "I was going over our bank statements last night. You know, trying to set up a college fund for Lily." "Oh, that's wonderful," she said, flipping a pancake with an expert flick of her wrist. "It's never too early to start saving." "Yeah, well, I noticed something odd. There was a big deposit a few weeks ago, a wire transfer for $50,000. It said it was from you." I watched her back, holding my breath. For a moment, she didn't move. Her arm, poised to flip another pancake, froze midair. The spatula hovered over the hot pan. Then, slowly, she lowered her arm and turned off the stove. She didn't turn to face me. She just stood there, her shoulders slumped, staring at the wall. "I was hoping you wouldn't see that," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. It was a confession. The knot in my stomach tightened into a ball of ice. "Mum, where did you get that money?" She finally turned around and the cheerful mask was gone. Her face was a canvas of pain and exhaustion. Her eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless sorrow that I had never seen before. "It's the settlement money, Sarah," she said, her voice breaking. My mind went blank. "Settlement? What settlement? What are you talking about?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading for understanding, bracing for the impact of her next words. "From the accident, honey. The one that killed my sister." I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth. My Aunt Carol. She had died in a car accident 6 months ago. A drunk driver had run a red light. It had devastated our family. My mother, most of all. They had been incredibly close. We never talked about it. The grief was too raw. "The driver's insurance, they finally settled," she continued, tears now streaming down her face. "It's blood money, Sarah. I didn't want it. I don't want anything to do with it. Taking it felt like putting a price on my sister's life. So I gave it to you and Lily. I wanted something good to come from something so horrible." The truth was so much more painful, so much more tragic than any of our ugly suspicions. My heart shattered for her, for the silent burden she had been carrying, the shame of how I'd thought of her, how Mark had spoken of her burned in my gut. "But, Mum, why didn't you tell us?" I whispered, taking a step towards her. She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I couldn't. Talking about it, it makes it real all over again. And besides," she gave a watery, self-deprecating laugh. "What was I supposed to say? Here's a pile of cash from my dead sister, enjoy. I just wanted it to do some good without the story attached. I wanted it to be a gift, a secret blessing. We stood there in the kitchen, the smell of cooling pancakes filling the air, and for a moment the ugly rift of the last 12 hours began to mend. I saw my mother clearly again, not a schemer, but a grieving woman, trying to create joy from unimaginable pain. I felt a surge of protective love for her that was fierce and absolute. I would make this right. I would go to Mark and I would make him see. I hugged my mum tightly, pouring all my remorse and love into the embrace. After a few minutes, I pulled away. "Okay," I said, my voice full of a new steely resolve. "Okay, Mum, I understand. I'm so sorry." I walked into the living room, ready to find Mark, to tell him everything, to apologise on my hands and knees for ever doubting her. But he wasn't there. The laptop was gone from the coffee table. I glanced around, confused. His car keys were gone from the hook by the door. I pulled out my phone to call him, but before I could, it buzzed in my hand with an email notification. It was a bank alert. I opened it, my blood running cold. Subject: large withdrawal notification. The email stated that a wire transfer had just been initiated from our joint checking account. My eyes scanned down the details, my mind refusing to comprehend what I was seeing. Amount: $50,000. Recipient account: David Vance, my father. For a split second, the world tilted on its axis. The email on my phone felt like a physical object, a block of ice pressing into my palm. $50,000. To my father. The numbers swam before my eyes, rearranging themselves into a single, brutal word. Betrayal. It wasn't just a betrayal of me, or of my mother. It was a theft. He had taken my mother's grief, her pain, her desperate attempt to create a blessing from tragedy, and he had handed it over to the one man on earth who would see it as nothing more than a vindication. A guttural sound of rage and disbelief escaped my throat. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed my keys, shoved my feet into my shoes, and ran out the door, shouting over my shoulder to my mum, "Don't worry, I'll fix this." I drove with a cold, terrifying clarity. My hands were steady on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but inside, a hurricane was raging. I called Mark's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. He was hiding. He knew what he'd done. The man I had promised to love and trust, the man who was supposed to be my partner, had colluded with my father. He had listened to that venom, let it seep into his ear. And then he had acted on it. He had taken the facts and used them to commit the ultimate act of disrespect. My father lived 20 minutes away, in a sterile new build in a gated community, the kind of place with perfectly manicured lawns and no soul. I blew past the security gate before the arm was fully raised, earning an angry shout from the guard. I didn't care. I screeched to a halt in my father's driveway, right behind Mark's car. They were both here. Of course they were. I didn't bother knocking. I slammed the front door open and stormed inside. They were in the living room, standing by the fireplace. My father had a glass of scotch in his hand, a smug, triumphant look on his face. Mark was standing stiffly beside him, his expression a wretched mix of guilt and defiance. He wouldn't look at me. "What have you done?" My voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a fury so profound it scared me. My father took a sip of his scotch. "Your husband did the sensible thing, Sarah. He protected his family's assets from a freeloader." "You will not call her that," I snarled, taking a step towards him. "You have no idea what that money is. You have no idea what you've done." Mark finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, let me explain. Your dad called this morning. He was worried. He said we needed to talk. Man to man. When I told him about the $50,000, he said it proved his point. That she had this money all along and was playing us for fools. He said the right thing to do was to secure it, to put it somewhere she couldn't touch it until we figured out what was really going on." "Secure it?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You call transferring it to his bank account securing it? You idiot! You absolute spineless idiot! You didn't secure it. You gave it away. You gave our money to him. It wasn't our money, Mark's voice cracked. It was mystery money from a liar. It was settlement money, I screamed, and the room fell silent. The force of my voice seemed to shock them both into stillness. It was the insurance settlement from the accident that killed her sister. My Aunt Carol, she didn't want it. She called it blood money. She gave it to us, to Lily, because she wanted something good to come from the worst moment of her life. She was hiding her grief, not her wealth. And you. I turned my full attention to my father, my eyes burning holes into his smug face. You just stole from a grieving woman. You took the price of her sister's life and you toasted to it with your goddamn scotch. The colour drained from my father's face. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a flicker of something that looked almost like shame. Mark stared at me, his mouth agape, the full weight of his actions finally crashing down on him. He looked from me to my father and back again, his mind clearly reeling. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice choked with horror. Sarah, I swear I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, I yelled, tears of rage and sorrow finally spilling down my cheeks. Because you didn't ask, you didn't trust me, and you didn't trust my mother. You trusted him. The man who abandoned his family. The man whose entire opinion of my mother is built on a decade of his own bitterness and guilt. You chose him over us. I turned my back on both of them. I pulled out my phone and with shaking fingers, I dialed my lawyer's number. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the polished mahogany table in the centre of the room. Hi, Jessica, it's Sarah Vance, I said, my voice now cold and steady. I need to initiate a transfer reversal. My husband has just made an unauthorised wire transfer of $50,000 from our joint account to my father's. Yes, $50,000. I believe it constitutes financial abuse and theft. I need you to freeze the recipient account immediately. My father lunged for the phone, but I was faster. I snatched it up. Don't you touch it. Mark was pale as a ghost. Sarah, please, stop. We can fix this. I'll transfer it back right now. I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake? I looked at him and I no longer saw the man I loved. I saw a weak man, a man who could be so easily manipulated, a man who, when tested, failed in the most fundamental way. This wasn't a mistake, Mark. This was a choice. You chose to believe the worst about my mother. You chose to side with him. You chose to go behind my back and steal from our family. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. This is a betrayal of everything we were supposed to be. I walked over to him, my eyes locked on his. You can transfer the money back, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You will transfer it back, right now. And then you can pack a bag. You are not coming home tonight. You are not coming home until I can figure out if the man I married still exists, or if he was just a figment of my imagination. Turning to my father, I felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. And you're right. I will thank you one day. I'll thank you for showing me exactly who my husband is, and for ensuring I never, ever make the mistake of letting you into my daughter's life again. You are no longer her grandfather. You are nothing. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out the door, leaving the two of them standing in the wreckage they had created. The drive home was a blur of tears, but they were different now. They weren't just tears of hurt, they were tears of release. I had stood up for my mother. I had stood up for myself. When I got home, my mum was sitting on the sofa, rocking Lily in her arms. She looked up at me, her eyes full of worry. I walked over, knelt down and put my head in her lap, just like I did when I was a little girl. The money is coming back, I said, my voice muffled by her dress. And Mark isn't coming home tonight. She didn't ask for details. She just stroked my hair, her touch a balm on my wounded soul. It's just money, Sarah. We'll be okay. We always are. And in that moment, I knew she was right. My marriage was broken, maybe irreparably. My relationship with my father was over for good. But the foundation of my life, the unconditional love of my mother, and the fierce, protective love I felt for my daughter. That was solid. That was real. We were a family of 3 generations of strong women, and we would be more than okay. We would be magnificent.